You see, a farmer's daughter was about to face down four armed men, threatening to burn her home to the ground. But the real weapon in this story wasn't the gleaming Winchester rifle she was holding. No, the real weapon was the secret her father had taught her, a secret that was about to turn this dusty little farm into a legend. And a man named Jake Morrison, a gunfighter who thought he'd seen it all, was about to witness something that would change not just his life, but the very course of the Wild West. The sun was a hot coin in the sky when Jake Morrison rode into Clearwater Springs. The town wasn't much, just a handful of wooden buildings squinting at each other across a dusty main street. A general store, a saloon, a church with a steeple that leaned like a tired old man. It was the kind of place you pass through, not the kind of place where legends were born. Or so he thought. Jake had been riding for 3 days straight, the weight of his reputation heavy in his saddlebags. At 28, they called him one of the finest shots west of the Mississippi. Towns hired him to solve their problems. Rustlers, claim jumpers, the kind of trouble that couldn't be settled with words. His Colt 45 had a way of making men listen when judges couldn't. He guided his mare down the main street at a walk, letting the town get a good look at him. He knew the image he projected, a man who lived by his gun, confident, capable, and dangerous. The blacksmith stopped his hammering. Old men on the general store porch paused their checker game. A woman hanging laundry watched him with eyes that missed nothing. This was his stage, and the performance had already begun. The Golden Horse Saloon was at the far end of the street, its doors swinging like an open invitation. He'd seen 1,000 places just like it. He dismounted, tied his horse, and pushed through the doors. The smell of stale whiskey and smoke hit him like a physical thing. A few locals were nursing drinks, their conversations dying as he walked in. This was part of the dance. The bartender, a big man with suspicion in his eyes, watched him approach. "Whiskey," Jake said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of authority. "The good stuff." The bartender raised an eyebrow but reached for a bottle from the top shelf. You learn quick in his line of work who to argue with and who to serve. "Not from around here," the bartender stated, more a fact than a question. "No," Jake said, taking the glass. "Name's Jake Morrison. Maybe you've heard of me." The name landed in the quiet room like a stone in a still pond. The bartender's eyes widened. Jake could feel the other men in the room shift, their attention now sharp and focused. His reputation, it seemed, had ridden ahead of him. "Jake Morrison," the bartender repeated, a new note of respect in his voice. "The one who cleaned up Deadwood." "Among other things," Jake allowed, letting a small, cold smile touch his lips. He was looking for a man, a ghost, really, a killer who'd murdered his mentor years ago, leaving behind nothing but a body and a single, unique clue, a specially tied hangman's knot left on the victim's door. It was an obscure knot, one used by a specific military unit during the war. Jake had been chasing that knot for 5 years, and the trail, faint as it was, had led him here, to this forgotten town. "I'm looking for information," Jake said, leaning on the bar. "Heard you have some trouble with rustlers." The bartender glanced around nervously. "You should talk to Sheriff Brennan, or maybe check out the Hartwell place, north of town. That's where the last incident happened." There was something in the way he said it, a fear that went deeper than a few stolen cows. It was the kind of fear Jake had learned to recognize, the kind that meant something was terribly, terribly wrong. Jake finished his whiskey, dropped a silver dollar on the bar, and turned to leave. He knew every eye was on him. Word would spread through Clearwater Springs like a prairie fire. Jake Morrison was here, but as he stepped back out into the blinding sun, he had no idea that the trouble at the Hartwell farm was not about stolen cattle. It was about something much older and much deadlier, and the ghost he'd been hunting for 5 years was closer than he could ever imagine. The ride to the Hartwell farm took him through peaceful country, rolling hills dotted with cattle. It was the kind of place a man could forget the world or be forgotten by it. The farmhouse was just as the bartender described, a neat white house, a big red barn. Picturesque. But as Jake got closer, he heard voices. Angry voices, coming from behind the barn. He nudged his horse around the side of the building, his hand instinctively moving toward his colt. and the scene that greeted him made his blood run cold. 4 men on horseback had a young woman cornered. She stood with her hands raised, but her chin was high, defiant. Jake recognized the type instantly. Bullies, predators. Their leader, a man with a scarred face and dead eyes, had a rifle pointed at her. This was the situation he was born to handle. "Now, Miss Hartwell," the leader sneered, his voice dripping with menace, "you tell your daddy we'll be back next week for our money. $500, or we take the farm." The young woman, who couldn't have been more than 22, stared him down. "My father told you, Mr. Crane. We don't owe you anything." Crane laughed, a sound like gravel grinding together. "Is that so? Maybe you need a little demonstration." He fired a shot over her head. The crack of the rifle echoed across the farmyard. The woman flinched, but she didn't break. That was enough for Jake. He spurred his horse forward, his Colt seeming to appear in his hand from nowhere. "That'll be enough of that," he called out, his voice a whip crack of command. The 4 men wheeled around, their faces shifting from cruel amusement to surprise. They saw him, a professional, a man who knew his way around a fight. "This is private business, mister," Crane said, his confidence wavering just a bit. "Ride on." Jake's smile was pure ice. "I'm Jake Morrison, and I make it my business to interfere with cowards who threaten women." The name hit them like a physical blow. 2 of the men actually backed their horses up a step. Crane's eyes narrowed, weighing his odds against the legend. "Jake Morrison," he said slowly, "the great gunfighter himself." He paused, a strange glint in his eye. "Tell me, Morrison, you ever serve? In the war?" The question was so out of place it threw Jake for a second. "What's that got to do with anything?" Crane's grin was unsettling. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a short length of rope, tied in a very specific, very familiar knot. "A hangman's noose." "Just curious," Crane said, tossing the rope from hand to hand. "You see a lot of old knots from the war out here." Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. It was the knot, the one from his mentor's cabin door, the one he'd been chasing for 5 long years. This wasn't just some random thug. This man, Crane, was connected to the ghost he was hunting. The entire world narrowed to this single moment, this single man. But before he could make a move, something even more impossible happened. The young woman, Miss Hartwell, stepped forward. "I appreciate the help, Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice impossibly calm. "But I can handle this myself." Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. In all his years, no one had ever turned down his help in a situation like this, especially not a young woman facing 4 armed men. "Miss," he started, "I don't think you understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," she cut him off, turning to face him. Her eyes were a startling green, and in their depths, he saw not fear, but a cold, hard fire. "Tell me, Mr. Morrison, you're famous for your quick draw, but how's your long-range shooting?" The question was bizarre. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Everything," she said, a strange, secret smile playing on her lips. She turned back to Crane and his men. "Gentlemen, this is my property, and you are no longer welcome on it." Crane laughed, that ugly, grating sound again. "Little lady, you got more guts than brains." "No," she said, her voice dropping, becoming something else entirely. "What I have is a better offer." She walked calmly toward the big red barn, her steps measured and sure. Jake kept his gun ready, his mind reeling. What was she doing? What was her game? She emerged a moment later, and what she was carrying made Jake's jaw drop. It wasn't just a simple farm rifle. It was a custom-built Winchester, the kind of weapon a professional marksman would use, complete with a long-range scope. She handled it with an easy familiarity that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. Jake was beginning to realize that this farm, this girl, this whole situation was far more than it appeared on the surface. "Here's my proposition," she announced, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "A shooting contest. You and me, Crane. We each take 1 shot. See that old weather vane on the barn roof? Whoever gets closer to the center wins." Crane stared at her, then burst out laughing. "A shooting contest? You're challenging me to a shooting contest?" "If I win," she continued, ignoring him, "you and your men leave this valley and never come back. If you win," she paused, "then my father will listen to your business proposal." Crane's laughter died down as he considered it. Jake could see the gears turning in his head. It was a ridiculous challenge, an insult to his manhood. There was no way he could lose to a farm girl. It was a chance to humiliate her, in the famous Jake Morrison, in one go. "All right, little lady," he said, his smirk returning. "You got yourself a deal, but you go first. I want to see this." "No," she said. "You go first. I want you to give it your best shot. I want there to be no doubt in anyone's mind about what happens next." The challenge in her voice was unmistakable. Jake looked from her to Crane, then up at the weather vane. It was 150 yards away, a tiny target spinning in the breeze. It was a shot for an expert. For a simple farmer's daughter, it was impossible. But as he looked at Elizabeth Hartwell, standing there with that professional-grade rifle, a chilling thought crossed his mind. What if she wasn't just a simple farmer's daughter? What if she was something else entirely? And what if this shooting contest wasn't a desperate gamble, but a calculated execution? Crane swaggered, full of confidence. He raised his own rifle, a standard Remington, and took his time aiming. He was no amateur. Jake had to give him that. He knew how to handle a weapon. The rifle cracked, and through his field glasses, Jake saw the bullet strike the metal rooster of the weather vane, off to the side. A solid hit, but not a great one. "Not bad," Crane said, pleased with himself. "Top that, little lady." Elizabeth didn't say a word. She moved with a focused, deliberate grace that was mesmerizing to watch. She set up a small, leather shooting rest she'd brought from the barn. She used her telescope, not just to look at the target, but to read the wind, studying the way the grass swayed, the way dust devils danced in the distance. This wasn't the preparation of a farm girl. This was the meticulous process of a military sniper. Jake felt a shiver run down his spine. The knot Crane had, the professional way his men operated. And now this. These things were not a coincidence. This was a convergence, a collision of secrets he was only just beginning to understand. Elizabeth finally settled into her shooting position. The farmyard went silent. Even the chickens seemed to be holding their breath. She took a slow, steady breath, let half of it out, and squeezed the trigger. The crack of her Winchester was different from Crane's. It was sharper, cleaner, a sound of pure precision. Through his glasses, Jake saw the weather vane spin violently. A perfect, dead-center shot. A hole punched clean through the heart of the metal rooster. The silence that followed was absolute, thick with shock and disbelief. One of Crane's men let out a low whistle. Crane's face had gone pale, but Elizabeth wasn't finished. Before anyone could speak, she worked the lever of her rifle with fluid speed, chambered another round, and fired again. The second shot hit the post the weather vane was mounted on, splintering the wood and sending the whole assembly tilting sideways. "That's two," she said, her voice calm and level. She worked the lever again. The third shot shattered the mounting bracket completely, and the weather vane tumbled off the roof, crashing to the ground behind the barn. 3 perfect shots in under 10 seconds. It wasn't just good shooting, it was impossible. Jake lowered his glasses, his mind struggling to process what he'd just seen. He had built a reputation as one of the best marksmen in the West, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that he couldn't have made that sequence of shots. Not that fast, not that perfectly. Crane stared at the empty spot on the roof, his jaw slack. Who in the hell are you?" he stammered. Elizabeth stood up, her rifle held loosely at her side. "I'm Elizabeth Hartwell," she said, her green eyes locking onto Crane. "And my father is Thomas Hartwell. You might know him by a different name. During the war, they called him the Ghost, chief marksmanship instructor for the Union Army's elite sharpshooter corps." Jake's blood ran cold. Thomas Hartwell, the Ghost, a living legend who was supposedly killed in the final days of the war. His mentor had spoken of him with awe. He was the man who had developed the very techniques, the very training that had made Jake the man he was. He was also the man who had designed the training for the unit that used that specific hangman's knot. Crane wasn't just some thug extorting a farmer. He was here for the Ghost. "I've been practicing for this moment my entire life," Elizabeth continued, her voice resonating with cold power. "Waiting for someone to underestimate me, waiting for someone to threaten my family. I believe you've just given me that reason. Now get off my land." Crane and his men were frozen, their bluster and confidence shattered. They had walked into a farmer's yard expecting to bully a young girl, and had found themselves facing something they couldn't comprehend. They wheeled their horses around and galloped away, not looking back. The farm was quiet again, the only sound the whisper of the wind. Jake slowly holstered his Colt, his mind racing. He had come to Clearwater Springs hunting a ghost from his past, and had stumbled into a hornet's nest of secrets. This young woman wasn't just a farmer's daughter. She was the apprentice of a legend who was supposed to be dead. And the men who had just fled weren't simple rustlers. They were soldiers in a hidden war, and they knew exactly who lived on this farm. He turned to Elizabeth, who was calmly cleaning her rifle as if nothing had happened. "We need to talk," he said. Her remarkable green eyes met his. "Yes, Mr. Morrison," she said, a faint, knowing smile on her lips. "I believe we do." The true fight for the Hartwell farm, he realized, hadn't even begun, and he was standing right in the middle of it. "Your father taught you," Jake said, the words feeling inadequate. "That wasn't just teaching. That was military training." Elizabeth nodded, her movements precise as she finished cleaning the Winchester. "From the time I was 7, 4 hours a day, distance, windage, moving targets, tactical reloading, everything a soldier would need to know." "Why?" Jake pressed. "Why train you like that?" "Because he knew," she said, her voice dropping, "that someday his past would come looking for him. He knew men like Crane wouldn't forget. He wanted me to be able to protect what we've built here. To protect him." Jake looked toward the quiet farmhouse. He'd come here chasing the killer of his mentor and found the man who'd written the book on how to create such killers. "Crane's not," Jake said. "It was from your father's unit." "Yes," Elizabeth confirmed. "A calling card, a message. They weren't just here for money, Mr. Morrison. They were here to send a message to my father, to let him know he's been found." The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture that was darker and more complex than Jake could have imagined. This wasn't about extortion. This was a vendetta. "How long has this been going on?" "They've been pressuring us for 3 months. Little things at first. Fences cut, tools stolen. It's escalated since my father fell ill this winter. Pneumonia. He's barely strong enough to get out of bed." So she had been handling this all on her own, running a farm, caring for a sick father, and fighting off a crew of professional thugs. Jake felt a surge of admiration mixed with dread. "Your presence here today forced their hand," she said, looking at him with an unnerving intensity. "They had to prove themselves in front of the famous Jake Morrison. Now they know what they're up against, and they'll be back. Not with 4 men, but with an army." Before Jake could process that chilling prediction, a rider approached. It was the sheriff, a man in his 50s with tired, weary eyes. "Miss Hartwell," Sheriff Brennan said, dismounting, "heard shots out this way." "Just some target practice, Sheriff," Elizabeth said smoothly. Brennan's eyes flickered to Jake, then around the farmyard, taking in the splintered wood on the barn roof. His gaze lingered for a moment on the fallen weather vane. "Target practice," he repeated, his tone flat. He knew. He had to know. "Saw Crane and his boys riding out of here like the devil was on their heels," the sheriff continued, his eyes on Elizabeth. "You want to tell me what that was about?" "A business disagreement," she said simply. "We resolved it." The sheriff sighed, a long, deep sound of exhaustion. "Miss Hartwell, I know Crane's been trouble, but you can't take the law into your own hands. These men are dangerous." "So am I, Sheriff," Elizabeth said, and the quiet steel in her voice made both men pause. There was a current running between the sheriff and Elizabeth, a tension that Jake couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't hostility, but it wasn't trust either. "I came to give you a warning," Brennan said, his voice low. "I got a telegraph this morning. A warrant's been issued for your father." Jake's head snapped up. "A warrant? For what?" "Desertion," the sheriff said, not looking at either of them. "And treason. An old charge from the end of the war, just reactivated. They say he stole military secrets." It was a lie, a convenient lie, a way to legally hunt down a man who had gone into hiding. "Who issued the warrant?" Jake demanded. A federal judge I've never heard of, pushed through by a man named Colonel Marcus Whitfield. Brennan finally looked up, and his eyes were full of a desperate, pleading fear. Listen to me. Whitfield is the one funding Crane. He's a former Confederate officer, a man with money and power, and he's been buying up influence all over the territory. He wants your father for something. This warrant is just his legal cover. This was the twist Jake never saw coming. It wasn't just a vendetta, it was a conspiracy. A powerful man was using the law itself as a weapon. Why are you telling us this? Elizabeth asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. Why risk helping us? The sheriff's face crumpled. Because Whitfield has my son, he whispered, the words choked with anguish. My boy went to work in the mining camps up north, in Whitfield's territory. They're holding him. If I don't cooperate, if I don't deliver your father, they'll kill him. The sheriff wasn't a weak man, he was a compromised one. A father trapped in an impossible situation. He was supposed to be their enemy, the man serving the warrant, but instead he was their secret, desperate ally. He's giving me until tomorrow night to bring your father in, Brennan said, his voice cracking. After that, Whitfield is sending his own men, an entire company of them. He's not just coming to arrest a man, Miss Hartwell. He's coming to wipe this farm off the map. Jake's mind raced. They were trapped, outnumbered, outgunned, and now the law itself was against them. They had no allies, nowhere to run. The peaceful farm had become a fortress under siege, and the enemy wasn't just at the gates. He was wearing a badge and holding a judge's warrant. The ghost Jake had been hunting had a name, Colonel Whitfield, and he wasn't just a killer. He was building an empire, and Thomas Hartwell was the one man who could stand in his way, or the one man whose secrets could secure Whitfield's power forever. The weight of Sheriff Brennan's confession settled over the farm like a shroud. They were facing a private army led by a ruthless ghost from the past, and their only potential ally in town was a man being blackmailed into betraying them. What does Whitfield want with him? Jake asked, his mind sorting through the tactical nightmare they were in. What secrets could be worth all this? My father never spoke of the end of the war, Elizabeth said, her gaze fixed on the house. Only that he saw things, learned things, that made him want to disappear forever. The answer lay inside with the ailing legend himself. They found Thomas Hartwell sitting up in bed, an old Springfield rifle across his lap. He was pale and thin, but his eyes were sharp, clear, and full of a soldier's weary resolve. He had heard everything. Whitfield, Thomas said, his voice raspy but firm. I always knew this day would come. He looked at Jake, his eyes assessing, calculating. You wear that gun like you were born with it. Who trained you? A man named Sergeant Elias Vance, Jake replied. Thomas Hartwell's eyes closed for a moment. A flicker of pain crossed his face. Elias, he was a good man, the best I ever trained. What happened to him? He was murdered 5 years ago by a man who left a knot on his door. Whitfield's knot, Thomas breathed. Elias must have found something that led him to Whitfield. He took a ragged breath and began to speak, revealing the secret he had guarded for more than a decade. In the final weeks of the war, Thomas began, my unit was tasked with a secret mission. We were to intercept a Confederate gold shipment meant to fund a new rebellion after Lee's surrender. It was being overseen by a brilliant and utterly ruthless Confederate colonel, Marcus Whitfield. We tracked them for weeks, but it was a trap. Whitfield wasn't moving gold. He was moving something far more valuable, a complete set of Union Army intelligence ledgers, troop movements, supply lines, spy networks, everything. He had a traitor on the inside. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Whitfield hadn't just been a soldier. He'd been planning for the aftermath, for a shadow war. We cornered him in a valley in Virginia, Thomas continued. It was a bloodbath. Whitfield was a tactical genius. He used the terrain, his men. He sacrificed them without a thought to buy himself time. In the end, it was just him and me. He was wounded, the ledgers scattered. I could have killed him. But the ledgers? I knew if that intelligence got out, the war wouldn't really be over. It would just go underground. So I made a choice. He paused, the memory still raw. I took the ledgers, and I buried Colonel Marcus Whitfield in a shallow grave. Or so I thought. I burned his body, but I couldn't be sure. I faked my own death, took a new name, and disappeared. I was the only one who knew where the ledgers were hidden. Now it all made sense. Whitfield hadn't just survived. He had spent the last 10 years building a new army, a secret empire in the West. And now he was one step away from reclaiming the intelligence that would allow him to plunge the nation back into chaos. The ledgers, Jake said. Where are they? Safe, Thomas said. But he knows they're here. He knows I'm the only one who can lead him to them. That's what he wants, not just to kill me. He wants what I know. He's not just coming with an army, Elizabeth said, her voice grim. He's coming with the law on his side. A desperate plan began to form in Jake's mind. It was reckless. It was borderline suicidal. But it was the only chance they had. We can't fight his army, Jake said. Not head on, so we have to change the battlefield. He turned to Elizabeth. Your shooting demonstration was impressive, but it was a performance. What do you mean? You showed them you were a marksman. You didn't show them what your father really taught you. You didn't show them how a ghost fights. Her eyes widened as she understood. Guerrilla tactics, invisibility, the art of the sharpshooter, not just hitting a target, but controlling the terrain, using fear and precision as weapons. Thomas Hartwell looked from his daughter to Jake, a flicker of the old commander returning to his eyes. He's right, he said. Whitfield is coming for a fortress. We won't give him one. We'll give him a graveyard. The new plan was audacious. They would abandon the farm. They would use the surrounding hills, the creeks, the trees, the entire valley as their weapon. They would bleed Whitfield's army, sow confusion, and turn his numbers against him. But first, they had to deal with the sheriff. Brennan is the key, Jake said. Whitfield expects him to lead the way, to be the public face of this arrest. We need to get to him. We need to turn Whitfield's pawn into our hidden knight. But how could they get a message to a man who was being watched, whose every move was monitored? The answer came from Elizabeth. The laundry line, she said, a glint in her eye. The woman you saw when you rode into town. Mrs. Gable. She's the town's eyes and ears. And she uses a code. The way she hangs the clothes, it's how the women share news the men aren't supposed to hear. It was a hidden network, hiding in plain sight, a system of communication Whitfield's military mind would never even think to look for. While the men prepared for war with guns and tactics, the women of Clearwater Springs had a secret weapon of their own. As night fell, Elizabeth crept out of the farm and made her way toward the town. Her mission was not to fight, but to send a message. A message hung on a clothesline, written in sheets and shirts, that would tell Sheriff Brennan that hope was not lost, and that the battle for Clearwater Springs would be fought not just with bullets, but with secrets. Under the cover of a moonless night, they moved Thomas Hartwell. It was a slow, agonizing process, the sick man leaning heavily on Jake. They carried him not to the hills, but to a place no one would think to look, the crypt beneath the crooked steeple of the town church. It was damp and cold, but it was fortified stone, a hidden bunker in the heart of the town Whitfield sought to conquer. It was here the final plan was laid. Mrs. Gable's message on the clothesline had been a masterpiece of simple code. A pair of blue trousers hung next to a white sheet meant, meet at midnight. A child's red sock pinned to the sleeve of a man's shirt meant, bring water. Sheriff Brennan appeared at the church just as the clock struck 12, his face a mask of haggard desperation. They're coming at dawn, he whispered, his eyes darting toward the shadows. Whitfield himself is leading them. He's planning to make a public spectacle of it. Arrest the traitor, secure the farm. He wants the whole town to watch. He's not going to the farm, Jake said. He's coming here. He laid out the plan for the sheriff. It was a plan built on deception and misdirection. Whitfield's army would find an empty farm. The tracks would lead them not into the hills, but on a wild goose chase looping back toward the town. While his army was scattered, Whitfield and his inner circle would be lured into Clearwater Springs, believing Thomas Hartwell was hiding there. He'll be expecting a sniper in the hills, Jake explained. He won't be expecting one in the church steeple. The steeple. It was the highest point in town, with a commanding view of the entire main street. From there, a single skilled rifleman could control the entire battlefield. From there, Elizabeth could become the ghost her father had trained her to be. Brennan's role was critical. He would play the part of the loyal pawn. He would lead Whitfield into the town, down the main street, right into the kill zone. "He'll have his men watching my every move," Brennan protested. "He'll kill my son if he even suspects." "He won't suspect," Jake said, "because you're going to do exactly what he says. You're going to look beaten. You're going to look terrified. You're going to lead him right where we want him. And when the first shot is fired, you have one job: get the townsfolk to safety inside the general store." It was a terrible risk to ask of the man, but the sheriff nodded, his jaw set. The chance to save his son, to reclaim his honor, burned in his eyes. As dawn approached, the town of Clearwater Springs transformed. It was no longer a sleepy outpost. It was a baited trap. Jake, along with the blacksmith and a few other trusted men from the town, prepared their positions. They weren't soldiers, but they were men defending their homes. Elizabeth climbed the rickety ladder into the church steeple. The small, dusty space became her sniper's nest. She had a view of the entire main street. She laid out her ammunition, checked the wind, and settled into wait. Below her, the town held its breath. The rising sun cast long, ominous shadows across the empty street. Then they heard it. The sound of dozens of horses. Whitfield's army had arrived. Just as they planned, the main force, led by Crane, found the empty farm and followed the false trail into the surrounding country. But Whitfield, too arrogant to join a simple manhunt, rode into town with his 10 best men, led by a seemingly broken Sheriff Brennan. Jake watched from the alley beside the saloon as Whitfield rode down the center of the street. He sat on his horse like a king, his immaculate uniform a stark contrast to the dusty town. He was confident, victorious. He had the law, the numbers, and the power. He believed he had already won. He stopped his horse right in the center of the town square, directly below the church steeple. "Thomas Hartwell!" Whitfield's voice boomed, echoing off the silent buildings. "I know you are here. Surrender now, and I will grant the rest of this town a swift end." It was the signal. High above in the steeple, Elizabeth took a breath. She wasn't aiming for Whitfield. That wasn't the plan. The plan was to dismantle his command, to create chaos. Her first shot wasn't a crack. It was a thunderclap. It didn't hit a man. It hit the brass eagle atop the flagpole in the center of the square. The eagle exploded in a shower of metal fragments. Whitfield's men flinched, their horses rearing in panic as they searched for a sniper they couldn't see. Her second shot, a split second later, hit the hat of the man standing to Whitfield's right, sending it spinning into the dust. Her third shattered the rifle stock of the man on his left. 3 shots, 3 messages. "I am everywhere. I can't be seen. And you are all dead if you make a wrong move." The psychological attack was devastating. Whitfield's elite guards, trained for open battle, were completely unprepared for a ghost who struck from nowhere. "Find her!" Whitfield roared, his arrogance turning to fury. But it was too late. That was the moment Jake and the townsmen opened fire from the alleys and doorways. It wasn't an attack. It was a distraction. It forced Whitfield's men to take cover, to divide their attention. In that moment of chaos, Sheriff Brennan acted. He drew his pistol, not at Whitfield, but at the 2 guards closest to him. He shot them both before they could react, then screamed at the few terrified onlookers frozen on the street. "Get to the store! Now!" Whitfield, enraged at the betrayal, turned his pistol on Brennan, but before he could fire, another shot rang out from the steeple. This one was different. This one was personal. The bullet tore through the hand holding Whitfield's pistol, shattering the bone and sending the gun clattering into the dust. The great colonel was disarmed, his command structure broken, his men pinned down by an invisible enemy, and his pawn had turned on him. The trap had been sprung. The battle for Clearwater Springs had begun, not with an army's charge, but with the precise, terrifying shots of a single ghost in a church steeple. Whitfield's disciplined soldiers broke, pinned down by Jake and the townsmen from the ground, and terrorized by Elizabeth's impossible shots from above. They scrambled for cover. The main street of Clearwater Springs became a chaotic death trap. Elizabeth didn't shoot to kill. She shot to disable, to dismantle. A bullet through a man's holster, destroying his weapon. A shot that splintered the doorway he was hiding behind, showering him with wood. A shot that kicked up dust in front of his face, blinding him. She was a phantom, her rifle sowing fear more effectively than death. Colonel Whitfield, clutching his shattered hand, his face a mask of disbelief and fury, dragged himself behind a water trough. His arrogance had been his undoing. He had walked into a town of farmers and found a military-grade ambush. "Crane!" he roared, his voice hoarse with pain. "Crane, get your men back to the town, now!" He knew his main force was only minutes away. If they could return and surround the town, they could still crush this pathetic little rebellion. But Jake had planned for that too. While Whitfield was being lured into town, the blacksmith had been busy. He and his sons had taken their heaviest chains and tools to the narrow canyon pass that was the only fast way back to Clearwater Springs. As Crane and his 30 men galloped back toward the town, they were met with a thunderous explosion. It wasn't dynamite. It was a carefully engineered rock slide. The blacksmith, using his knowledge of leverage and stress points, had sent half a cliff face tumbling down, completely blocking the pass. Crane's army was cut off, trapped outside the valley, unable to help their leader. Whitfield was alone. The tide had turned completely. The remaining guards, seeing their leader wounded and their reinforcements gone, lost their nerve. 2 of them threw down their guns and surrendered. 3 more tried to make a run for it and were quickly captured by the now emboldened townsfolk. Soon only Whitfield remained. He was cornered behind the trough, bleeding, his grand army and grander plans in ruins. Jake approached him slowly, his Colt steady. "It's over, Colonel." Whitfield looked up, and in his eyes Jake saw not defeat, but pure, unadulterated hatred. "This changes nothing," he spat. "There are others. This movement is bigger than me. You haven't won. You've only delayed the inevitable." "Maybe," Jake said, "but today this town is free of you." He was about to take Whitfield into custody when he saw it. A slight movement from the colonel's boot. A tiny, gleaming derringer. A last, desperate gamble. But before Jake could even react, a final shot echoed from the church steeple. It was quiet, precise. The bullet hit the derringer in Whitfield's boot, the impact sending a shock of pain up his leg and flipping the tiny gun harmlessly into the dust. Elizabeth had been watching. She had seen everything. She had protected him. The fight was over. Later, as the townsfolk celebrated their improbable victory, Jake found Elizabeth sitting in a pew in the quiet church, her rifle resting beside her. She looked exhausted, the adrenaline of the fight replaced by a profound weariness. "You did it," Jake said softly. "You saved us all." She looked up at him, her green eyes searching his face. "I did what my father taught me to do. I protected my home." Down in the crypt, Thomas Hartwell was finally resting peacefully, the news of their victory a better medicine than any doctor could provide. Sheriff Brennan, his son now safe, was a hero, his honor restored. But Jake knew this was not the end. Whitfield had spoken of others. This was just one battle in a larger, hidden war. As if reading his mind, Elizabeth said, "This isn't over, is it?" "No," Jake said, "but now they know we're here. Now they know we'll fight back." A few weeks later, a telegram arrived. It was from the territorial governor. Sheriff Brennan's official report, detailing the conspiracy and their role in stopping it, had made its way to the capital. The governor wasn't just grateful, he was impressed. He had a proposition. The territory was vast and the law was spread thin. He needed people who could operate outside the lines, people who understood the new kind of threat emerging in the West. He was creating a new position, territorial marshal, and he wanted Jake and Elizabeth to be the first. Jake found Elizabeth on the porch of her farmhouse, watching the sunset paint the sky. He showed her the telegram. She read it, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Partners?" she asked. "Partners," Jake confirmed. He had come to Clearwater Springs looking for justice for one man's death. He was leaving with a new purpose, a new partner, and a mission to bring justice to the entire territory. Their journey was just beginning. The ghost of the Confederacy had been wounded, but its shadow still lingered, and out in the vast, lawless expanse of the West, other colonels were waiting, building their own secret empires. Jake Morrison and Elizabeth Hartwell, the gunfighter and the ghost, would be there to meet them. If you enjoyed this story of justice in the Old West, you won't want to miss what we have in store for you. We've got 2 more incredible tales right on your screen now. Just click one to keep the adventure going. And if you haven't already, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't regret it. We upload stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat, and you don't want to miss a single one. Thanks for watching.